At 79 years old, Eric Clapton has reached that stage of life where he no longer filters his memories, no longer softens the past, and no longer protects reputations that never deserved protection in the first place. For decades, he stayed quiet, letting myths grow around him, myths about friendships, rivalries, and secret tensions inside the world of classic rock. But now, Clapton has finally opened the door and spoken honestly about the musicians he could never stand. The ones who rubbed him the wrong way, challenged his patience, tested his pride, or simply clashed with his musical soul. These aren't cheap shots. These are the stories he spent a lifetime avoiding. And when Clapton tells the truth, he does it with the weight of a man who has nothing left to hide. His list begins with a name people rarely expect. 1. Ginger Baker. At 79, Eric Clapton finally admits something he kept buried for decades. He couldn't stand working with Ginger Baker. Yes, he admired him. Yes, Baker was a drumming genius unlike anything the world had seen before. But Clapton says the truth nobody else dared. Ginger Baker was chaos wrapped in skin. His temper could fill a room, explode without warning, and turn rehearsals into battlegrounds. Clapton described it as living inside a volcano, never knowing when the next eruption would blow everything apart. Cream may have sounded magical on stage, but behind closed doors, Clapton says he often felt like he was trapped between an angry god and a ticking bomb. The tension, the unpredictability, the endless confrontations drained him emotionally. Clapton now admits he reached a point where he simply dreaded being around Baker. He respected the musician, but he could never stand the man. 2. Jack Bruce. If Ginger Baker was fire, Jack Bruce was thunder. Clapton reveals that Bruce was one of the greatest bass players he ever worked with and one of the hardest human beings to deal with. Bruce's ego, his intensity, his refusal to back down from any argument made Cream feel like a war zone. Clapton confesses that nearly every rehearsal began with shouting and ended with him playing peacekeeper between Bruce and Baker. He loved Bruce's voice, his songwriting, his musical instincts, but he hated the constant conflict that followed him everywhere. At 79, Clapton can finally say it without guilt. He couldn't stand the exhausting drama Bruce carried into every room. It became so overwhelming that Clapton eventually walked away from Cream, not because of the music, but because he simply couldn't survive the psychological battlefield these two men created. 3. Yngwie Malmsteen. Third name on Clapton's list is a shock for many fans. Yngwie Malmsteen. Clapton never hated him personally, but he openly admits he couldn't stand the style Malmsteen represented. Clapton has always been a blues player, a guitarist who values emotion, space, and storytelling. To him, the guitar isn't a race for who can play the fastest notes, it's a voice. So when Malmsteen burst onto the scene with blazing speed, endless arpeggios, and a style that sounded like classical music hypercharged with electricity, Clapton felt an instant disconnection. He once said he had no interest in guitar players who treat music like a sport, a line that insiders always understood as being aimed at Malmsteen. Clapton respected his technical ability, but he could never stand listening to him. To Clapton, soul matters more than speed, and Malmsteen represented everything he didn't believe guitar playing should become.
4. Jeff Beck. The fourth person Clapton opens up about is Jeff Beck, and this isn't hatred, it's something more complicated. For years, Clapton carried a quiet resentment toward Beck, not because he disliked him, but because he couldn't stand the endless comparisons forced onto them. Both had history with the Yardbirds, both became guitar icons, and both were constantly measured against one another. Clapton now admits that Beck's wild creativity and unpredictability made him feel insecure. Beck would play something outrageous, something no one could predict or copy, and Clapton felt like the entire world was asking him, "Can you do that too?" The pressure, the rivalry, the constant competition wore him down. Clapton confesses he envied Beck as much as he admired him, and he couldn't stand how those comparisons followed him through his entire career. It wasn't Beck he disliked, it was the shadow he tasked. 5. Jimi Hendrix. The final and most surprising name Clapton reveals is Jimi Hendrix. Clapton loved him, mourned him, and admired him deeply. But he also confesses something he hid for decades. Hendrix terrified him. Clapton couldn't stand how Hendrix made him feel small, insecure, unsure of his own talent. The first time Clapton saw Hendrix play live, he said it felt like the world had shifted under his feet. Hendrix didn't follow rules. He reinvented the instrument every time he touched it. Clapton admits that Hendrix made every guitarist of that era question their worth, their skills, their future, including him. He once said that standing next to Hendrix on a stage felt like staring directly into a hurricane. Clapton adored the man, but he could never shake the uncomfortable truth that Hendrix made him feel inadequate. And at 79, he finally admits it openly.
Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.